Hi, my name is Michael, and this is a situation I was in sophomore year. I was taking in the spring semester two very difficult pre-med classes. I was taking Organic Chemistry 1, and I was taking Microbiology. And with those classes, they had two midterms on the same day. Twice. So what did I do? I did what any great student would do, and I stayed up the night before to study for those exams for the last minute. And I ended up getting an A in both classes. So today I'm going to teach you all how to cram effectively for exams, and in the future, in this last step, I'm going to teach you how to figure out how to actually study for exams the right way so that you don't have to put yourself in that situation like I did so many times. So, step one of my cramming system is scheduling my time. When I had an exam for Microbiology and Organic Chemistry 1, they were at 1 p.m. and at 7 p.m. the same day. So what did I do? I made sure to remove or get out of any obligations that I had the day of. I would see that I have about 24 hours or a day and a half to study for these exams. So what did I do? I took basically all of the obligations that I had and I canceled them. And then after that, I would basically just figure out a way to stay up all night and then go to bed right before the exams. So what I would do is I would wake up, I would go through the day before these exams and study all day as far as I could go. And then around 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. or when I was absolutely exhausted, I would go to bed, get at least 6 to 7 hours of sleep, and then wake up at noon right before my microbiology exam. Then I would go and study a bit more before my organic chemistry exam at 7, and that's how I scheduled my time in these cramming situations. Now, besides scheduling time, I also truly recommend getting up to at least 6 hours of rest, because with that rest, it is absolutely necessary that I get my rest to get good grades on these exams, because then I can think clearly and remember the stuff that I was cramming the night before. Now, step two of my multi-step process to cram is to gather resources for my exam. In general, what I'd like to do when I was in the trenches for these exams was to get a bunch of caffeine. So I would go to my local CVS, I would get some energy drink, I would get some bottled coffee, or maybe if you're in a good mood, some tea or some caffeinated soda, and then I would prepare that because I knew I would be staying up way past the closing time of CVS. I'll get perhaps one bottle of really triple shot energy coffee that's around 200 milligrams of caffeine. I would never actually need to drink that much because I don't drink coffee regularly, so I'm very prone to the effects of caffeine, but that's what I did. Besides gathering the caffeine, what else is gathering desserts is very important. So in terms of desserts or snacks that I would like to eat during the exams, I was a bit less healthy back in those days because I was so stressed. So I would often just get a bunch of candies or snacks from the local store to make sure that I could motivate myself to get through and make sure I wouldn't get hungry. But now that I'm studying for exams more effectively now, I find that fruits are such a great way to study and snack while not making myself more sluggish when studying for these exams. Also, if I do have a meal, I would get something from Main Street or from my local dining hall to make sure that I was being filled with energy when studying for these exams. So making sure I was full and then having some snacks to get me through the rest of the long night of studying was something super important that would help make my motivation last during these dark times. Step 3 of my 6-step process is to understand my motivation. So inherently, I have to understand why do I need to do well in this exam and why am I taking this class in the first place. For me, the answer is quite simple. I wanted to go to medical/dental school, so I had to go and study for these exams to get into grad school, to be able to study and do the career that I wanted to do. I was at a top school and I needed to study, and I was there for a reason. So I pushed myself to study extensively throughout the night, even if that meant staying up all night to make sure I did well in these exams. Now, the motivation that you have may be a bit different. So whether it be doing an exam in high school or doing an exam in some sort of grad school, there has to be some sort of motivation that's pushing you to study for these exams and stay up. Because otherwise, I would just give myself an excuse and I would go to bed early. A lot of the times I put a lot of academic stress on myself because I wanted to get good grades, I wanted to get A's, and that's what ultimately made me stay up. Because I wanted to get good grades on my transcript and I wanted to apply to grad school with good grades in these difficult courses. So that's what motivated me. But a lot of the times motivation can be different. If you're in a high school class or a college class that is mandatory, then perhaps you could simply say that you want to make your GPA stay high and you want it to be as high as possible, so it's worth it to study for these classes. Ultimately, the way I viewed it, I could study for these exams only tonight or before the exam. I can never do something after the exam to fix that. So that's what helped push me to keep studying when I had to at the last minute. Step 4 is to do the hard work effectively. Now, when studying for classes and for exams, I find that I go into a phenomenon where there's a thing called Parkinson's law, where if I schedule a very small amount of time for myself to do something, I'm going to get it done in that amount of time, and I will do it much more effectively than if I were to schedule something for a much longer period of time. So if I gave myself 10 minutes to go through my emails, I would try to go very rapid fire through them and just skim the unnecessary details. But if I gave myself 2 hours, I would look at my phone, give myself a break, do something else, and looking through my emails would eventually take me 2 hours because that's what I scheduled it to be. So when studying for exams, there is a pressure with cramming that sort of follows this Parkinson's law and eventually makes me study for the things that I think are most important to study. But from experience and from research done on studying for exams, the most effective way to study is by testing oneself. So if the teacher has any practice exams that are available to me, that is what I go through first the night before the exam. Ultimately, I could do them earlier, but this is a 24-hour window we're talking about. So those practice exams are necessary. Other than that, if it's a class that's very problem-based, such as organic chemistry or math or something along those lines, then I would do problem sets or practice problems that they gave me. Depending on what are the most effective practice problems, that is what I order them in. So for example, in organic chemistry, we got textbook problems and problem sets from the teaching assistants. The problem sets were usually more focused and more effective at teaching the material, so I would often just go through that and go through the textbook problems if I had any additional misunderstanding about the material or I thought that it was a good use of my time. Besides doing practice exams and then practice problems if I'm in a sort of technical course, if I'm studying for a memorization heavy class like microbiology, what I would do is make the flashcards, if I didn't make them yet, on a system called Anki, which is a flashcard system that allows me to write a sentence and then hide one of the words in the sentence. So then I would be testing myself. And then after making all those flashcards, if I still had time, I would go through all the flashcards at least once, because then I get them in my brain right before the exam. Now, is this the most effective way? No, and we know that. But this is the night before the exam, and we need to do what needs to be done. So making those flashcards, one, helps me memorize the material because I'm actively changing the material to be put into that Anki system. Besides making the flashcards, studying them one more time ensures that I remember as much of the information as possible before I go into that exam, because inherently I am testing myself in a sort of practice exam style with these flashcards. Now, step 5, which is my favorite step, is to go to bed. So depending on how much I have to study for these microbio or these organic chemistry exams, this is my schedule. I would basically just take as much time as I could before midnight, before 9 p.m. to study as many organic chemistry problems as possible. And then what I would do is I would take the time to make and study the flashcards for microbiology. For microbiology, we had some practice questions, but no other ways to test ourselves. So ultimately, the flashcards were the most effective tool that I used. And I ultimately did the most of my time and was more effective with my time and efficient with my time because I knew that I was under such a time constraint. If I tried to memorize every detail of microbiology, I would have thousands of flashcards. But what I realized is that I need to focus on the key material, and with that, I went through the slides and I saw, okay, this is the material that seems important, so this is what I'm going to study. And ultimately, I was able to do well on these exams and get A's. But going to bed after doing that is the most important part, because if I don't go to bed and I don't get sleep, then it's going to be a very difficult time for me. So I go to sleep around 5 or 6 a.m. in these circumstances, and then I wake up right before the exam. So if my exam is at 9, then yeah, I'm going to have to go to bed around midnight, 2 a.m., worst case 3 a.m. But if my exam is at 1 or 2, then my sleep schedule might be at risk because I need to stay up to study for these exams. Now, the 6th step and the most important step for the cramming process is to prevent cramming in the future. So, cramming was a big issue for me, and honestly, with these very difficult exams and very difficult classes and the workload that I had, I don't blame myself for putting myself in these situations. I do inherently think that I could have handled it better. So that was a time management issue, and the best way that I found to resolve that is to use an online calendar. When using an online calendar, I can make changes to the events that I want to do throughout the day, and I'm able to plan each of my days in advance. Now, what I do at the beginning of each semester with the classes I plan on taking is I look and see the major assignments and exams that are due. With these major assignments and exams, I put them in a separate calendar called exams on my GCal, and then I rank them and put them in red on my calendar. By ranking, I just mean labeling, so I see that this exam is on May 2nd, for example. I put that and I set reminders. 1 day, 3 days, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. then I know that it's coming up and I have nothing to ignore it with. So it's never a situation where I know that the exam is, or I don't know that the exam is coming up. It's a situation where I see that the exam is coming up and I had to manage that. So for example, if there's an exam a week from now, what I would do is I would do a little bit every day and I would prioritize that. So I wouldn't do anything else for the day besides studying for that exam if I would prevent cramming in the future. So if I had my microbiology exam and I had 4 units to study, day 1 of the 7 days before the exam is I would make flashcards on Unit 1 and study those. Day 2 is I would study the Unit 1 flashcards, make the Unit 2 flashcards, and study the Unit 2 flashcards after that. Inherently, I would do some sort of process that extends the time in which I can do it, because with flashcards, the earlier that I am able to memorize the information and repeat the information, which is what Anki does, the better I am to memorize that information. And Anki is the best resource. It's used by medical students across the world, and it just gives the flashcards such that there's a learning curve where we forget it. It gives it right before we forget the flashcard. So then we are able to boost our long-term memory and retention of that information. Now, there's a whole art to actually making good flashcards, which can be investigated through other videos on YouTube, but that is the best way to prevent cramming in the future and to actually cram for exams by extending that cramming period, not over 24 hours, but perhaps over a week. Now, besides that, in general, with, for example, classes like organic chemistry, the most important step that I would recommend is setting a deadline for myself to do the optional problems. For example, with problem sets, I would never finish all the problems before the exam, which is a major hindrance to the grade I could have received on these exams. I know one exam it completely backfired, but because I studied very hard for the final, I was able to get an A. With practice problems that are given every week or textbook problems that are given for the classes and units we study, I would give myself a deadline. In the inorganic chemistry class that I'm in right now, we get quizzed every week on the material. And while it's an open note quiz, it gives me a deadline to force myself to study the optional practice problems, which is why I'm able to do so well in the class. Besides that, organic chemistry, on the other hand, didn't give me those deadlines. It was all optional work. So the optional work would be pushed aside until the exam, and I have so little time to do them correctly. But if I were to do them every week, I would already have a background in the material, and I'd be able to redo them before this exam started, and I'd be very confident in the material. So that is how I crammed for exams at an Ivy League university and how I got out of that cramming situation. For the most part, it still happens sometimes, but I make sure to spread my time out much more efficiently than I did a year or two ago. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!